excited to be here today. My name is Louise Marchena, and I am the Senior Director of Programs at Equal Justice USA, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's discussion, The Death Penalty Movement, a conversation with two leaders on the front lines. But before I introduce our speakers, let me just share a little bit about Equal Justice USA. Equal Justice USA is a national organization that works to transform the justice system by promoting responses to violence that break cycles of trauma. We work at the intersection of criminal justice, public health, and racial justice to elevate healing over retribution, meet the needs of survivors, advance racial equity, and build community safety. EJUSA provides nationally acclaimed training and leadership development, on-the-ground support, and strategic assistance to state and local organizations working to provide healing center services to survivors of violence, create trauma-informed approaches to public safety and violence prevention, and to end the death penalty, which is what we'll be diving into a little bit today. And just a little bit about our death penalty program. EJUSA has ended the death penalty in 9 states together with our state partners. We've launched the nation's only conservative anti-death penalty group called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, with local branches in 14 states, soon to be 15. We've also founded an evangelical network, which is another anti-death penalty group. We've built coalitions of family members of murder victims, law enforcement, and other key stakeholders in more than half a dozen states. And we've organized thousands of people to speak against executions. We've trained organizers and advocates on strategy and communications to strengthen repeal campaigns in several states. And we've generated thousands of media stories about the death penalty's failure, including features in the New York Times, The Post, Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, and many, many more. So I please encourage you all to continue hearing about our events. Please sign up to our mailing list. One of our staff will be dropping that link in the chat for us as well. And also look forward to these webinars. We are planning to do these, we hope, on a quarterly basis. And we definitely want to mark our next webinar with the 10th anniversary of the death penalty repeal in Connecticut. And we'll also be hosting a few events when we release a case study later this year on the ecosystem of safety EJUSA has helped to build in the city of Newark. So I know many of you have been hearing about all the great news coming out of Newark, New Jersey. So now to actually introduce our speaker for today's event. First is Jennifer Pryor. Welcome, Jennifer. Jennifer is the Director of Organizing and Community Outreach at Ohioans to Stop Executions. Jennifer is passionate about the judicial reform in all of its parts. As a grassroots community organizer, she has been invited into the personal trauma of many community members and it's committed to playing a role in eliminating systemic trauma. Jennifer is a mother of 1 son and a very involved auntie to 20. 12 whom are Ohioans. She has a desire to end executions in Ohio and reform Ohio's judicial system for them. While a student of Northern Michigan University, she developed an insatiable appetite for learning and is always seeking more knowledge. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you. And our next speaker is Sarah Kraft. She is the Death Penalty Program Director at Equal Justice USA. Sarah manages EJUSA's strategy to end the death penalty in the United States. And since joining the organization in 2005, she has provided hands-on assistance, training, campaign coordination, and strategic guidance to organizations and activists in almost every state with the death penalty still on its books. Sarah's work with partners in Colorado helped to lead to the death penalty repeal in 2020. And before Sarah started at EJUSA, Sarah worked with the American Friends Service Committee and the Unitarian Universalist Association. That's a mouthful. Covering national policy issues and managing Get Out the Vote and poll monitoring campaigns in Washington, D.C. So welcome to you, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here. And to our audience members, if you have questions throughout this conversation, please feel free to use the Q&A box instead of the chat. So we do have Mona Cadena, which is our EJUSA's Director of Advocacy and Campaigns. She'll be answering questions in the background throughout our discussion and also helping to elevate questions that our speakers can answer at the end. We want to make sure to be respectful of everyone's time. So that's why we are starting on time, and we will be ending at 1:15 on the dot because we know that folks' time is precious. So Sarah and Jen, any opening remarks that you'd like to share before I start off with some questions? We're a little early, so it's good.
I mostly just want to say thank you for everyone for being here, because that's already a huge step. Just being interested in this conversation and the work that EJUSA is doing to help end the death penalty nationwide. Just being here is huge. So I love you, beautiful people.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to say welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hello, Mom. My mother is on this. I didn't look to see if my dad is also on, but hello to my family back in Indiana. And hello to all of you that I've gotten to know in the last 17 years, and look forward to meeting all of you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. So Sarah, I'm actually going to start off with you because you've been here for a minute, right? Not too long, just for a minute, right? But from your time here and from a 30,000 foot view, what have you seen over the last 17 years in this movement? And what's the current state of the death penalty policy in the United States?
Sure. Well, a lot has changed in 17 years. I came to Equal Justice USA in 2005 when George W. Bush was president. One of the most prolific executors was in office. And now President Biden is the first president to openly oppose the death penalty. In 2005, there were 60 executions, whereas in 2019, before the pandemic, there was just over a third of that, 22 executions. So already you can see the movement that we've had in the last 17 years. The movement has grown. More people are concerned about the egregious cases of individuals being executed despite either strong claims of innocence or very clear evidence of racial bias or really significant impairments that should have constitutionally spared them from the death penalty. And there's a broad recognition that those problems are throughout the criminal legal system, with the death penalty just being a policy that takes that system to the extreme. And not only has the movement grown, but it's become more strategic. We've successfully ended the death penalty in 11 states, and I have no doubt in my mind that there will be more to come. And in terms of the current state of the death penalty as a policy, as I said, we've seen a really steady decline and erosion of the death penalty in every possible measurement. Executions are at historic lows. The number of people given a death sentence every year has dropped significantly. And those 11 states that have ended the death penalty, 3 of those ended it through court rulings that abolished the law in practice, and 8 ended the death penalty through policymakers actively taking the death penalty off the books. But in addition to those 11 states, 3 additional states have announced, their governors have announced moratorium on executions, which means they've said there will not be any executions during my time in office. And in addition to that, 10 states have not had an execution in the last 10 years. So there's just a steady decline. And with that decline, there's also been geographic isolation. Only 5 counties in the United States, 5 of over 3,000 counties, account for more than 20% of all US executions. And since 2020, there have been only 7 states that have had executions. But as it's declined, it's also continued to target the most vulnerable people. I think most of us understand that the death penalty is supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst of the people who commit harm. But one in the 11 people all but one of the people executed in 2021 had 1 or more significant impairments, like a mental illness, historic brain injury, brain damage, an IQ that was in the intellectually disabled range, chronic serious childhood trauma, neglect, or abuse. And all of their cases were tainted by racial bias, inadequate representation, and disproportionate sentencing in those states. So that's a long-winded answer to your question about where we are currently. I think where we are is in a really positive place of decline, but with still a lot more work to do.
No, thank you for that. The death penalty movement has come a very long way in the past 17 years. You also mentioned a difference, right, in administration, right, between the Bush administration and the Biden administration. Can you just talk a little bit about the death penalty on the federal level?
Yes, absolutely. And the federal government is an outlier. It has become an outlier in that they performed so many executions during the Trump administration. But I think it really is noteworthy that, at the federal level, we had, some executions under President Bush, no executions during President Obama's era, but we did see death sentences during that time. We continued to see death sentences throughout the Trump administration, and certainly many, many executions at the end of his administration. And right now there are still just under 50 people facing execution at the federal level. And it has been a robust call from supporters of all ilks throughout the community, calling for President Biden to commute those death sentences and to say, as a federal government, we will not be executing, certainly under his watch, and it would really significantly reduce the risk of an execution spree like we saw under President Trump.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. So Jen, I know that you are a very experienced organizer, right? Who has recently just started working on repealing the death penalty, more specifically in Ohio. But what have you seen that draws you to this work, right? Or what are the things that are unique and exciting about working on to end the death penalty?
Thank you for that, Louise. So first, it's the optimism of the people. Like, people really believe it can be done. I'm fortunate enough to be in Ohio, in a state that's not actively executing people. And so people feel like this is an opportunity. We can actually end the death penalty permanently in our state. So that's one thing. And I would love to, elaborate on that further. But to be completely honest, I'm a Black woman. I have a Black son. My son he turns 4 today. It's his birthday. And I think about his future. And so when I look at the judicial system, it's got many flaws. And what I've learned about the justice system, the judicial system, is that the death penalty actually contains every single one of those flaws. And if we can eliminate that system, which is very costly and wasteful, then we'll have resources to address all the other issues as well. We'll have resources to address the trauma that causes additional trauma and violence. We'll have resources for victim families. We'll have resources for communities to build and build communities that are safer. And I think ultimately, people who say that they want the death penalty, they are saying the same thing that people who don't want the death penalty is. We want safer communities, right? But we just disagree on how to get there. And so if we can somehow find a way to create these safer communities, especially by using those resources we're wasting on killing people to say don't kill people, then we might find some agreements on the issue. And I think the proof is going to be in the pudding. Like, we're going to have to show people like this does work. These nonviolent actions and policies are effective, and they will change your communities and make them safer. We all just want a safer space. And that's what I want for my son's future. And I would love to make that his birthday gift. Like right now, I wish I could write a senator right now and say, like, for my son's birthday, just vote. But I hope that answers your question, Louise.
It does. I love that. I love that you would want to give that to your son for his birthday. You're mentioning resources. Can you talk a little bit about what those resources are and how you think they can address, right, alternatives to the death penalty?
Sure. Like, for example, you get a misdemeanor case or a felony case, you get to have a trial. It's costly to the community, but the community thinks it's worth it. It's worth it to have that case so that we can eliminate bad behavior, right? With death cases, it's a little different. You get the guilt and innocence trial, but then you also have the sentencing trial automatically just because it's a death case. And those are both expensive to taxpayers and Ohioans. I'm again speaking for Ohio. Those are both expensive to us, and it doesn't deter crime. So, like, I'm gonna go into a store and rob a store, and someone ends up murdered. Terrible, terrible act. Someone's dead. I wasn't thinking about my consequences when I did that, right? I wasn't thinking about the death penalty. It doesn't change my mind that way. And so it doesn't deter crime. It doesn't make Ohioans safer. It doesn't make any of us safer wherever there is a capital statute on the books. It doesn't make us safer, but we do still spend those resources. We get the prosecutors, which is really, really unfortunate, and I could go on and on about this. Prosecutors are paid out of the same pool of money that public defenders are paid out of. But public defenders don't have access to the same specialists that prosecutors have access to. Public defenders are very often defending people who can't adequately defend themselves, as Sarah mentioned, people with many challenges or disabilities, right? So they're there to defend themselves, and they're not adequately able to do so. But the prosecutors have almost an unlimited pool of resources they can pull from to convict these people, and then paint them as the worst of the worst and get them the death penalty. It's a gross injustice, to be honest, because what we do know about the death penalty is it ends someone's opportunity for redemption. It takes away from the community that opportunity for restoration. And I really believe in restoration, because what we hear from victim families very often is that the death penalty doesn't provide me with healing or closure. We don't get that from the death penalty. But I do want something. You took away my loved one and I want something, and the death penalty doesn't provide it. So the closest thing that we can see to providing any type of healing, it's not even adequate because you still took their loved one away, would be restoration. And we actually, with the death penalty policy, we don't provide that. People are caged away, separated from other inmates, and forgotten about when they could be getting redemption, providing restoration to families. And we could be taking those same death penalty resources in their trials and using those for community and trauma. And trauma centers are much needed throughout America. They help families of victims. They help. I can go on and on, like I said, about just trauma centers. So I hope that answers your question. We're just wasting resources and we're not doing any good to the community, ultimately.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, it does answer the question. I think it's really important to not just highlight that the death penalty is costly and it uses resources, right? But like, what are the ways in which we can actually reinvest those resources that actually do bring healing, that bring restoration, that bring restorative accountability to communities? So I appreciate that very much. I think this question is for both of you, so you can chime in however, but I think you both alluded a little bit to the racist history of the death penalty. So history is very clear that as pressure has ramped up to end lynchings, the use of the death penalty increased significantly. And like our broader criminal legal system, racism is at the core of the death penalty system. So for example, 41% of death row is occupied by Black men. And out of 186 people who have been exonerated since 1976 because of wrongful convictions, 54% of those folks have been Black. How do you see that playing out in who gets executed?
I am muted first, so I know Sarah's looking at me to go. I said
Oh, we lost your audio, Jennifer.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
I have a Black son, and so my concern is that because of, like I said, the many problems with the justice system are also contained inside the death penalty. My issues are, will my son get picked up just because he's in the wrong place at the wrong time and he fits the description? Not that am I raising a monster? I have no doubt that I'm raising a wonderful human being. My issues are, will my son be profiled, picked up, and then will the system work against him to make sure that they close their case? Is their goal to close the case? And it's so easy to victimize marginalized people. And I mean, that's anywhere from your LGBTQ plus community, your Black folks, your immigrants. It doesn't matter. If you are considered an other in the United States, can be easily marginalized. And we have to create a truly equitable system of justice if we actually believe in justice. If justice is blind, the way we imagine justice to be, then we've got to create that space, because what we know, statistically, we know that it has not been blind in the past. It's not blind currently. But if the work that EJUSA is doing, the work that I am doing here in Ohio, our goal is to make justice truly blind so that we all can walk freely and contribute to society without fear of being harmed by the justice system. Sarah?
Yeah, Louise, it's a great question. You mentioned a couple of statistics, and I want to add a few more on top of that. I mentioned that 7 states had executions since the beginning of 2020. Well, 6 of those states were former Confederate states. The 7th was Missouri, and Missouri, remained part of the Union during the Civil War, but still allowed slavery. So I think you sort of linked the death penalty back to historic lynchings, but it goes back even further than that to our history of chattel slavery in the United States. I think sentences and executions disproportionately target Black individuals, but those sentences and executions also disproportionately involve victims who were white and female, and whose lives it really shows whose lives matter, and the acceptance of violence, and especially state violence against Black and brown bodies, and where we again put our resources towards certain lives. So I just wanted to add that piece of context to the historical and modern racism of the criminal legal system and the death penalty in particular.
And I have one more thing to add just about Ohio, which I told you I would do this, Louise, is that Ohio has had 11 exonerees from our death row, and 8 of them are Black men. And I think that is a travesty. And 6 of those people have actually come out of one county, Cuyahoga County, which is a little bit terrifying. So what's going on in Cuyahoga County? I don't want to make the prosecutor feel bad, but maybe I do. But we have to think about why do we have a concentration of racist practices that allow 6 people, 5 of which were Black in Cuyahoga County, to be convicted of crimes they didn't commit, had nothing to do with, weren't around for, to be sentenced to death, and then fight 20 years of their lives to get off death row. That is the cost of a policy of this nature.
Well, thank you for highlighting that. That is definitely a tragedy. This next question is actually for both of you as well. And Jennifer, you alluded to wanting to say a little bit more about this, about like how folks get involved in this work, but the death penalty is such a very specific issue inside of the broader criminal justice system. So what are some of the other reasons that people are drawn to the work? So it's for both of you, but Jennifer, since you were like, I could say more about this, I'm gonna pull at you first.
I love people. This is my favorite. That's why I'm a grassroots organizer. I love interacting with people, and they tell you. One thing is for sure, the death penalty is a very nuanced issue, but people come to it for a wide variety of reasons. And I think that's why I love it, because we agree on this one thing we agree on. You came here because you are a pro-life supporter. You came here because of innocence. You came here because you want to be conservative as far as fiscal responsibility in government or government oversight. People are coming in for many, many reasons. But ultimately, what no one wants to say, because I don't know how humanity has gotten away from this basic thing, which is the moral question, right? but like everyone's kind of here because they morally disagree with the death penalty. And they're afraid to say it's like saying like they believe in the tooth fairy. Like they don't want to admit that they have morals, but truthfully, everyone is truly here because they don't see a moral reason to execute someone. And especially, I could ramble, so I'm not going to, but I'm going to say this. When we look back at how we used execution in the past, we would kill people over theft. You know, we would execute people over who they thought God was, right? Like we executed people over a lot of things. And so now we're down to, if you kill someone, then we can kill you. It's still as barbaric as killing someone over stealing an apple, right? It's still as barbaric. It's still as inhumane. And so people are coming to terms with that. Like, it doesn't make me feel safer. I don't feel better knowing that we're killing people because they're killing people. Like, what has happened to this person's life that made them feel the need to take a life? And how could we have done better as a society? And so those are the conversations I get to have with folks. And the brainstorming that comes out of that, like, I work for OTSI, Ohioans to Stop Executions. We are singularly focused on ending the death penalty. But me as an individual, I get to work with people who want to stop trauma. They want to heal communities. I get to interact with folks that really want to see a better world. And so that's what I get to interact with, and that's what I get to hear.
Thank you so much for that. It brings to mind that phrase, like, instead of asking folks like, what did you do, but what happened to you, right? Because trauma is at the core of all of this. So Sarah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Jennifer said. You know, she's certainly on the front lines and talking to so many individuals about why they're coming to this issue, and really also convincing so many people as to why the death penalty is broken. You know, I'll just add that, you know, I mentioned at the top that there have been so many cases in the last 5-10 years that have hit the spotlight and have garnered a lot of attention. And those cases are ones that are, you know, have really significant issues. And those issues don't just cover those cases. Those issues are throughout the system, throughout those executions. I mean, you know, this last year, the case of Julius Jones just exploded onto, you know, people's consciousness, and he became a household name. You know, the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns wore his name on his helmet, I think. Like, we're talking like a real consciousness of cases with egregious racial bias and really strong claims of innocence, and, you know, people who should not have faced execution, should not have faced really ultimately trial because of their impairments. And I think that those cases have really elevated people's consciousness about the death penalty and brought them in and interested in this issue.
The Equal Justice USA also plays a unique role in kind of bringing together unlikely allies. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the shared narratives across these constituents that bring people to this work?
Sure. Excuse me. Yes. I mean, you know, we host, as you mentioned, the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty Project. We have the EJUSA Evangelical Network. You know, I think Jen hit on, you know, the cost of the death penalty and the recognition from conservatives and liberals alike that we're spending exorbitant resources on a tiny fraction of cases in order to get an ultimate punishment that doesn't deter crime. And so all of those resources play into, you know, everybody wants a piece of the pie. And so I think across the political spectrum, we see people who are concerned about where those resources are going. Certainly, again, as Jennifer highlighted, there, you know, the moral question, you know, we're seeing a lot of people coming to the table around the issues of redemption and their faith and how it plays into this. You know, I think another through line has to do with, you know, the 186 people who have been exonerated. You know, again, liberals and conservatives alike recognize that we should not be executing innocent people, and frankly, we shouldn't be sentencing and, you know, and convicting innocent people, and recognize that as a problem. And I think, you know, this narrative around safety, I think, you know, it's in our consciousness now more than ever that we want safe communities, and that has really brought people to the table to have discussions around what is it that really is keeping our community safe, or what can keep our community safe. And the death penalty is just nowhere on that list. It's nowhere in people's consciousness that that is what will keep them safe when they really sit down and try to identify what safety is for themselves and for their communities.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah, because it's often, sometimes it's difficult, right, for us to think about, like, how are folks from different constituencies, right, and different political spectrums actually coming together on a movement, but they are when it comes to the death penalty. So it's really important to talk about and highlight that. You also alluded to this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the death penalty on a federal level, but like, can you talk a little bit about what the politics are here around the death penalty? Like, our country is really polarized right now about everything, right? From vaccines to masking. So is this a Democratic or Republican issue? And do you see this coming up a lot in elections? And you can both answer this.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Jen take that and talk about who our main, sponsors and champions are in Ohio. Take it away, Jen.
I'm proud to say that in Ohio's recently red state, we have like an agreement across the aisle to end the death penalty. It's not partisan at all. In the Senate here in Ohio, it was the primary sponsor was Nikki Antonia, who's a Democrat. In the House, the primary sponsor was Jean Schmidt, who was a Republican. Jean Schmidt actually is who I think is the most remarkable, because she has a history of being not just a history. She was adamant that Ohio needed the death penalty 25 years ago. She was about the current statute. That was her bill. And she has come 180 on the issue, and now she is our primary sponsor on the House bill, which has a historical amount of momentum. It's had, so just briefly, guys, I don't want to get into the nerdum weeds with you guys, but Ohio has a very long legislative process. We are committee-based, and we have hearings, typically 3, sometimes 4. This particular bill has had 5 hearings. HB 183 in Ohio has had 5 hearings, and it is championed by Jean Schmidt, who, again, used to support the death penalty, and now she is fighting for ending the death penalty in Ohio with tooth and nail. She's using every resource and every experience that she has to make sure that she can retire peacefully without leaving a legacy of death, and she means it. And our governor, who is also Republican here, he doesn't. It's an unofficial moratorium in the state of Ohio. He didn't have the power to actually put a moratorium in place in this state, but he basically said, we're not going to be killing people and torturing people in my name. So people often think that Republicans, they assume that they want the death penalty, that they're bloodthirsty, and they're not. They believe in life issues. They believe in innocence. They believe in conservative, fiscal conservatism, and they believe in, limited small government. So if you imagine the death penalty, it kind of oversteps in all those realms. The Democrats are typically with us, but not always either. So really, this is a purple issue, and we have convincing to do on both sides, and we have a lot of alliances and a lot of allies on both sides. And it's been interesting to observe and work with.
Thank you. There was a question in the chat about what changed Schmidt's mind. Could you speak to that?
I don't know what changed Schmidt's mind. I know that she's made friends with, Sarah might know, but I know she's made friends with some people who have been adamantly against the death penalty, and I think that might have had an effect. But Sarah, what do you know?
Joe D'Ambrosio. Joe D'Ambrosio is an exoneree from Ohio's death penalty. His execution was stopped by total luck, not because the system was working at all. And my understanding is that Representative Schmidt met Joe, heard him speak, and then was able to get to know him personally, and that's what really transformed her position on the death penalty. Maybe someone can write his name in the chat, like Jeff Gamzo, who I saw is on. He'll know how to spell it, and folks should really Google that case because it's remarkable.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That's actually really helpful. So we've already started talking about Ohio being on this list of the next places that we will be ending the death penalty. Sarah, could you share a little bit about like where the movement is going next?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I've already mentioned, one of the places the movement is going is to Congress, to the federal level. There's a congressional bill to end the death penalty with, gosh, I don't know what the number of co-sponsors are now, but it's a lot. There's also efforts, as I mentioned, for President Biden to commute the sentences of those on federal death row. But in addition to Ohio, there are several states that we could see moving death penalty repeal. In fact, several states that have been moving death penalty repeal. Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, all states in the West are also have also had bills in the last several years. I think we'll see more activity in those places. I think we'll see movement places like Arizona, Kentucky, Louisiana, California, any state that still has a death penalty is in play. And I think we'll see activity in lots of those places. I want to note and shout out to Jennifer's neighbors in Kentucky, who just last week passed a bill through the legislature, eliminating the death penalty for those who have severe mental illness. They've followed suit from Ohio, who also did the same thing a couple of years ago. And I think we'll see that effort also in places like Florida and South Dakota. So, I mean, where is everywhere that still has a death penalty, I think you'll see activity. There's no shortage of places, even in Texas. Like, I know that Texas is seen as, well, it is rightfully seen as an outlier and a state that often executes. And I think we'll see movement there as well. And I would be loath to forget to mention the case of Melissa Lucio, which is on a lot of people's mind right now. She has an execution date scheduled for April, a woman who is facing execution for a crime that arguably never happened. Her daughter was in a tragic accident, and Melissa Lucio faced a trial and conviction for that death and could be executed next month. So another case that folks should check out. Particularly the Innocence Project has a lot of information and petitions around that case.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for also highlighting that case. I think it's really important for people to know what's happening right now. But like you mentioned, the death penalty is still something that we are fighting in several states, including on the federal level. So can you both talk a little bit about like people who are on this call right now and listening, what can they do to help end the death penalty? Like, how can folks right now get involved in their work, regardless of the state that they're living in?
Well, Jen, I would love for you to tell people specifically how they can get involved in Ohio, but I see randomly a lot of people in the chat, a lot of our state partners in the chat talking about what's going on in their states. I'm so grateful to see that. Please find out what's going on in your state, because there are movements in every single state to end the death penalty. If you go to EJUSA's website, the Take Action page, there's opportunity for anybody to take action. And we have some state specific actions up there. Happy to make sure that you know who to contact in your state, but also there are those national actions for people to take. And I would love for people to get involved in Ohio. I think that's sort of a chance to end the death penalty this year in Ohio. And Jen, let people know what we can do to see that happen.
Okay, first things first. NoDeathPenaltyOH.com is our campaign website. We would love for you to get involved because there are ways for you to get involved as someone that's in the state of Ohio, as well as someone who is out of state. Like most states, we love to hear from Ohioans, and we have legislation, so our lawmakers want to hear from Ohioans, but because we all know the 6 degrees of separation and the world has shrunk, if you know someone in Ohio, I would love it if you told them about this, have a conversation with your network. It's not the most comfortable conversation to have. We're talking about politics, not the weather, right? But have a conversation with your network and tell them what your thoughts are on the death penalty. Get their thoughts on the death penalty. They'll be friendly to that. And if they are in Ohio, invite them to participate. And honestly, the biggest thing that you can do is just get engaged where you are. Every state, like Sarah says, has some organization that is fighting to end the death penalty if the death penalty is still active. So just get involved where you are. And I promise you, because I am that nosy organizer, I will find you there. So it's that simple. Just tell your people about us and join the fight where you're standing right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So that concludes our conversation with our amazing experts here on the death penalty. But just from looking at the chat as well as the Q&A, it looks like Mona has done an incredible job of answering all the questions. So we don't have any open questions right now. I do want to remind folks to please sign up for our mailing list. Look out for some of the next scheduled quarterly conversations that we'll be having, especially the one around the ecosystem, the trauma-informed ecosystem in Newark and that case study, and the 10th anniversary repeal of the death penalty in Connecticut. If you can, you should probably save your chat conversation. There are tons of links, not just links that EJUSA has included, but from other resources. So I promised that we would end on time. So I thank you all for coming to today's conversation. And I look forward to hearing more about the death penalty and to participating in more of these events.
Louise,
Thank
can I
you
say
all.
one more thing before you
Oh
end?
my gosh,
I
please,
am that person.
yes. Be that person.
I'm going to be that person. I am. EJUSA does so much for the movement across the nation. Donations are welcome to EJUSA. They help everyone get the work done. So if you haven't thought about it, please do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Sarah, any parting words?
I just happy that I get to hang out with Jen every day or so. And thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. And shout out to everyone in the chat. That's a really good looking chat there. I saw, I want to just highlight Noelle from North Carolina, put a link to the North Carolina group. And I would encourage state folks, please put your state org in the chat there so that if there are other folks from your state, they can find you. So an open invitation to do that. I'm going to play some music on the way out so people can do that. Share those state group links in the chat, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, folks, I hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. See you all soon.